Welcome to Commander Central, episode 296, and today we'll be taking a look at listener Hunter Arlo's Linvala Go Wide Auras deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Chris.
Chris, it's just you and I today. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going pretty good.
You have been probably busy at the shop lately as they are undergoing renovations. How's that whole project going?
I think it's almost done on the other side. So Tuesday when I went in, they had carpet laid down, so what was left was to finish the carpet and put trim up around the base, like the floor right there. And I think that was everything.
Yeah, I poked my head in there and it did look pretty finished because it's getting, we're busy in there on EDH night. It's loud and packed with people, so they could definitely use the space.
Right, I agree. Yeah, we'll find out tonight when I go in exactly how much farther they've gotten.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm glad to see that the local community is expanding just as rapidly as EDH seems to be expanding everywhere else.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Did you happen to see the Unfinity announcement? I guess we haven't talked about it, that came out about the unset that's going to be coming out next, I think it's June?
All that I've heard is that there's going to be legal playable cards in it. That's all I've heard, and I'm like, oh yeah. Boy.
So for those that didn't hear, there's an unset. We get those every couple of years. They're usually silver bordered. The difference this time is they will be black bordered, and some of the cards will be playable. Not all of the black border ones will be, because they're all black border, but some of the ones will be playable, and they'll be marked with like the little foil hollow stamp, and kind of the bottom middle is what's going to determine the playability. I'm going to guess there was some logistical reason why they couldn't just do one sheet of playable cards in black border and one sheet of silver border cards and mix them all together. I don't understand how the printer process works, but I'm assuming that's the case. That seems like the worst possible way to do that. At least long term, particularly because this isn't just Commander. Like, some of the stuff will technically maybe be playable in, Vintage or Legacy or things like that. So
that's for sure.
It seems like it's got potential to be kind of a mess, but WotC sometimes does things the dumbest way possible, and this seems like an example of that, I guess.
I'm kind of excited about it because I hope that they bring something to the game, that were cool, like with the other unsets, like little mechanics and stuff like that will allow you to play it in Commander. Like one of the mechanics I had an amusement with during the last unset was you get up and you have 10 seconds to run around the room and get as many high fives as you can, and you gain that much life or something like that. Those little things like that would be interesting to have, on an EDH night.
I'm going to guess those things won't port over. It's probably going to be a little bit more normal cards than that.
Oh, but such a shame.
Yeah. It is fine. I'm not a huge unset player or anything, but there are plenty of unset cards that can very easily be ported over to Commander, and they're just going to do more of that this time.
Yeah.
It's a way to reprint shock lands. People always need more shock lands. I get it. That's fine too. I just think it would have made everyone's life easier if they just would have kept things silver border that were silver and unplayable and let everything else be black border. It just seems like it was probably more expensive to do things that way, so they came up with this as a stopgap solution, and I think it feels like it's going to cause more problems because they already had an issue where one of the cards they used for an example, the version of it they uploaded in their announcement had the wrong foil stamp on it anyway.
Oh,
so
boy.
It looked like it was going to be legal in Legacy, and it wasn't. So they even screwed it up themselves. So
this is not going to work out very well.
Yeah, no, it just seems like a bunch of problems. But aside from that, it doesn't bother me. I don't care if there's goofy cards that wind up in other formats too. At this point, we already have Walking Dead stuff that's illegal, and, Stranger Things stuff, and, the Godzilla cards and the Dracula cards, and there's so many different border variants that, to get upset about, whatever silly uncard is going to wind up being legal just because it looks goofy. I just can't. I just don't care. It's just the game is just so strange at this point that it just doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, as long as it's not any cards that mess with my type of cards, like there were the few older uncards that did stuff like that. As long as it's nothing like that, I could care less.
The first thing one of the guys at the shop did on Tuesday, one of our local judges, because he knows how annoying I find mutate just rules wise. And one of the cards lets you destroy a creature and put 2 copies of it into play that have half the power of the previous version.
Yep.
Which copies the whole mutate stack and then still knocks the individual mutate things off until, I mean, like, it just like takes the rules nightmare of mutate and makes it that much more of a nightmare. He's like, oh, I couldn't wait to do this to you just to annoy you with how insane it's going to be for rules. I'm like, yeah, I thought of that.
I heard a lot of people talking about that card for combo base, like, you got your...
I mean, even just dumb stuff like hitting Great Merchant with it.
Yep, Great
Merchant. You don't
Merchant,
care what the power of Great Merchant are.
The elemental that creates tokens based on your lands or whatever. I can't even think of the name of it. The green one. I mean, there's so many of them, Craterhoof Behemoth. I mean, just start doing stupid stuff like that. I mean, that card seems really powerful, so...
Yeah, I mean, there's just, even like Gonti. If you're playing a Gonti deck, you're always looking to kill Gonti anyway. Why not make 2 copies of Gonti, in the process of killing him to recast him anyway?
Right.
Yeah, it'll be really good. So I'll be curious to see when it comes out. It's just one more thing, though. It's like, okay, we thought we had one of the sets next year that wouldn't be one you'd have to worry about in terms of playable cards, and that's not true. Even the unset's going to have playable stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be so much magic coming, so much.
Yeah, everyone get ready, because this is basically how it is from here on out, I guess.
Yeah, you're going to have to start picking and choosing what sets you want to look at, and the rest of them, you're just I don't even care about this one. That one's off the docket for the year.
Maybe you just have to do that. You still have to take some sets off. Like, I didn't skip Crimson Vow or anything. I read the cards, but I paid way less attention to Crimson Vow than I have previous sets. I just, needed a break.
Oh, I did too. That and Midnight Hunt were both kind of just like, whatever's, like, people are like, oh yeah, this is cool stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, I guess. I have no clue what any of that is. So
I just only have so much brain power to keep track of this stuff, and we've kind of clearly hit that limit.
Yes.
But it is what it is. I think more options are good for people, and if I have to skip out on a few things just because, that's fine. I'm okay with that. So if you out there in the listener land want to share your thoughts on the Unfinity set or the sheer amounts of cards that we'll be getting in 2022 or just anything at all, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can reach us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central. And you can also find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
And we also can be found at patreon.com. If you go to patreon.com/CMDRCentral, you can sign up for a multitude of rewards and be entered in to have a chance to win a couple of different giveaways we're giving away this month. We have a copy of Grim Monolith provided to us by a listener, as well as a couple of other packaged products from both Chris and Max. What do we have from you and Max, Chris?
So for me, we have I do believe it's Plane Chase Anthology, I do believe it is. I'd have to go look quick. The great big one, it's got the 4 decks in it, the Plane Chase cards, the dice, all that fun jazz. And then from Max, I do believe that it was a From the Vault lore, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I believe so. So thank you two very much for providing those. And yeah, we will be giving those away to some lucky patron supporters. So if you are a supporter by the end of the year, you'll be entered in that giveaway. So thanks to everyone for providing those for giveaways. And yeah, I'm looking forward to giving a little bit back to our listeners. You guys do a lot for us, so we appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into taking a look at a patron supporter, Hunter Arlo's list here. We have a Linvala Go Wide Auras deck. And Hunter says, I have not actually been consistently playing since around April 2020. There was a period around March or May this year where I began playing in the Slack games, but it hasn't been consistent. So if I were to say what my desired meta would be, I would probably call it the Commander Central Slack meta.
I haven't really played too much in that meta, but the few times that I did play in it, I got raffle stomped really hard, so it's a pretty powerful meta, so.
Everyone is just playing Scumbag Max style, I guess.
Yeah, apparently. No, it's just, when I did play, it was always with Max, so maybe they just they had to go up to his Scumbag level, to
that
play even.
That could be, maybe, yeah, that's right.
Okay, that makes a little bit. So we were told that this deck was originally a Bruna Voltron deck, but found out that as you leaned more into Bruna being a win con, the more aggressive and lower to the ground the deck became. I almost always had more fun suiting up several creatures than milling down and winning with the big Bruna blowout. The goal is to get several of my creatures out, suit them up, and have Linvala on standby as emergency protection. Which Linvala is extremely powerful for that. I've actually been contemplating on building a deck similar to this, not as auras or anything, but more of a, whether it be like blue-white flyers or blue-white something with Linvala as, commander backup for protection.
Hunter says, I haven't actually been able to play this version of the deck yet. He's thinking about the problems that will be inherent in Azorius will probably be present here, and that is a lack of speed. And that, combined with the resource loss of auras when the creature is destroyed, is what he's trying to be better prepared for.
Does seem like it's going to be a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
So, and budget, as we ask everybody, because we don't want to suggest, like ABR duels and all that fun jazz. So we're told budget is like about $20 for normal stuff and up to about $50 max for things that are like almost necessary that need to be put in.
Okay, that all makes sense. So I will quick read Linvala here, and then we'll kind of do our overall thoughts on this deck. Linvala is a flying angel wizard, 1 and a white and a blue, so 3 total for a 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, choose target non-land permanent an opponent controls, and until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. But perhaps more importantly here, you can sacrifice Linvala and choose hexproof or indestructible, and creatures you control gain that ability until end of turn. So looking at this deck, aside from suiting up Linvala, one of the uses here will be to use her to save your stuff from being removed.
Yes, I mean, extremely powerful ability. I'm just very happy they didn't put Flash on this card, because that would just be disgusting.
Yes. Oh, that'd be crazy. So overall, Chris, what are your kind of thoughts here on this deck, looking at it?
My overall thoughts on this deck, I'm going to be brutally honest with it, it needs a lot of work. I'm just going to drop the bomb right now. This one is kind of all over the place. It's kind of caught me off guard. Like, I was expecting hardcore auras. Like, when you think about Bruna, you think about, all these auras that make Bruna, massive and protection and all that. But the auras that are in here are not really doing that. And then the creature base is really good overall, but doesn't have the support.
You can definitely see the pieces in here of things that were probably really good in a Bruna deck that maybe aren't as good in this style deck.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's plenty of things to clean up here. I do like the idea of using Linvala versus Bruna. I think almost every Bruna deck looks really, really similar, and I think there's a lot more room here to do different things that you don't necessarily traditionally see in this kind of Azorius Auras deck. So I think we should mess around and come up with a few of those things.
Yes, I agree. I do like Linvala way better than Bruna too, because this is not going to draw a huge target on you as soon as you reveal your command.
Yes, absolutely. So let's look at the land base first. It's not very exciting to do, but it's a good place to start here.
Two-color land base is always great.
Yeah. So the first thing I will say, it is a relatively budget land base. There's a lot of things in here that come into play tapped and make 2 colors, or are just kind of a budget version of things you would run. Like Floodplain is one of the ETB tapped fetch land, so it comes into play tapped, and you can sack it to search up a plains or an island.
Yep.
There's Lonely Sandbar, which is a cycling land. Myriad Landscape lets you get 2 lands. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff in here. The one thing I would say, so about a year ago, I guested with Max on the Scrap Trawlers stream, and we built $50 budget decks. And I built a 2-color deck, so did Max. And one of the things that came up is, when you're playing a budget deck, you just can't put money into your land base. You just can't, for the most part. So I just put a ton of basics in, and a couple of the ETB tapped duels, like the ones that, comes in play tapped, but it gains you a life, and you can then tap it for either color.
Yep, kind of like a
guild gate I discovered. Yeah. The thing I discovered is the vast majority of the time, even when I drew those ETB tap duels, I just wished it was a basic. Especially in a deck. Now, maybe if you are playing a really tuned land base where you have a ton of utility lands, then maybe in that kind of deck, you want to have, as many lands as possible that can tap for both colors to give you the most versatility. This isn't that deck. There aren't that many utility lands here. I think in almost every situation where there's one of these lands that comes into play tapped, whether it's the Floodplain or the cycling lands, things like that aren't giving you something that's really, really powerful, I would honestly just run a basic. I think in the grand scheme of things, rather than a Lonely Sandbar that's once in a while going to be useful for cycling, I would just run a basic. I would just rather have another dozen basics in here and have your lands always be available for a deck that just doesn't necessarily seem to care that much about specific colors and just has a ton of lands that make colored mana.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. I mean, going through the deck overall, there's not a whole lot of cards that have double-colored pips within them.
Yeah.
It's a lot of single colors or, 1 blue, 1 white type of stuff.
I would dare, and of course you want to run Command Tower, because why not? It's cheap, run Command Tower, absolutely do that. If you have a Fabled Passage, there's really no reason not to run a Fabled Passage. But like, honestly, you could probably play this deck. There's 37 lands in it. You could play this deck probably with, 17 islands and 19 plains or something and just not even notice. Like, you would probably the vast majority of the time be just fine.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, dual lands are nice and everything, but since you're not ramping it out fast and you're not jamming lots of stuff really fast, there's no real need for them.
Now, because I tend to run very heavy dual land colored decks in my 2-color decks, but I run a ton of utility lands. So like, I have a lot of lands that just make colorless mana. So having the ability to tap that, land for 2 colors is much more useful to me in most of my deck. But like, the deck isn't built that way. There just aren't 15 utility lands in here making colorless mana. So rather than go over a bunch of individual lands, I would just suggest to Hunter, take a look at that. And if there's like a land that you're running for a dual land that's coming into play tapped, honestly, just run a basic. You're just going to be better off in this particular deck, I think.
I agree. I was going to bring up that because of the one of Azorius Chancery, because that of all those cards, that's the one that I dislike the most. Because as we have talked about that before, the bouncing of the land where you're not getting any value out of it really is not doing anything for you.
Yeah, I mean, there are some situations, I've seen people run those in decks where like they also have a Bojuka Bog or something along those lines. And like once in a while, the extra utility of reusing that Bojuka Bog or something is very good. Again, it's just the deck doesn't have that kind of thing to get the extra utility from it. I'd run a basic there as well, for sure.
Agreed.
Okay, so let's move over from lands and let's go over and take a look at the artifacts that are here.
Sure.
There are 10 artifacts. We have an Arcane Signet, an Archaeomancer's Map, an Azorius Signet, a Bident of Thassa, a Helm of the Gods, which is 1 mana for an equipment, and equips for 1, and equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. That's pretty solid here.
Yep.
A Holy Avenger, 2 and a white for an equipment, equips for 2 and a white. Enchanted creature has double strike, and when it deals combat damage, you may put an aura card from your hand onto the battlefield attached to it. That's pretty solid, and especially because of the way double strike works, you're going to get to hit once, attach an aura, then it'll say hit for the second time, utilizing that aura, and then you get to attach another aura.
It's very, very scary how that can work.
Yeah. In this deck, it's a really good spot for it. Mind Stone, another Mana Rock, Soul Ring, Swiftfoot Boots to protect your stuff. The key to Swifties here over Lightning Greaves is it has hexproof, so you can get around being able to attach stuff to your own creature, unlike with Lightning Greaves.
Yep.
And a Thought Vessel.
Yes,
so
indeed.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Mana Rocks here, which are really your only ramp. And I guess Archaeomancer's Map, which kind of lets you ramp a little bit and or catch up. So that's there as well. So let's say 6. Any specific thoughts on the artifact suite or things you would add here for artifacts, Chris?
So my biggest thought on these artifacts overall is looking at the land base of 37 lands, and we decided, 4 or 5 mana rocks and that stuff.
Yeah.
That seems like a lot of mana for this deck when the CMC curve of this is like 3.05. I don't know if I'd run so much. I mean, I'd almost want something more that's netting me card draw or adding to the idea of the deck.
Yeah, I'm torn. I feel like I usually see a little more ramp than this in a deck. I would say I do think you could get away with turning one of those lands, dropping down to 37 lands, or excuse me, down to 36 lands from 37, and putting another Mana Rock in here or something just to have a little more ramp. I don't know if you would get hurt by that.
I could see that.
I do agree it needs a little more card draw, but I also wonder about Bident of Thassa.
Yeah, that's another one that I haven't seen that played in a very long time, to be honest with you.
And I still run it in my Tauren deck. Like, that's a really go wide deck. Whereas, I oftentimes have like 6 or 7 things in play very frequently, if not more than that. I think it's tougher for this deck to get that many things in play. I mean, maybe it's worth it if you only have 2. I'm not really sure. But I think this is the kind of card that sometimes is going to, when you have one creature out, you're like, oh, it feels bad to drop this and draw 1 card and then somebody board wipes or something, and like you're not going to get anything off it for another 2 or 3 turns.
Yep.
Like, I think I would rather just turn that into something that's going to draw me, like for 4 mana, you can just draw 3 or 4 cards pretty consistently every single time, and it might take you multiple turns from Bident to draw that many cards.
I agree with that, too. And the ability isn't, it's not like Thassa's ability where it makes your creature unblockable type of thing. It forces your opponents to attack, which, if you force your opponents, like, creatures' opponents have to attack this turn. If someone did that to me, I'm going to look at you and be like, okay, I'm attacking you, I guess.
Right, yeah. Again, we mentioned Holy Avenger. I'd like to stress, I think this is a great deck for Holy Avenger. Helm of the Gods, too, but especially Holy Avenger. I'm glad to see that in here, for sure.
The one that I was thinking of was Nettlecyst. Nettlecyst is equipment. And now while it's not the same as aura based per se, you know, but it still fits that theme, and it comes in as a living weapon. So I mean, it comes out and it gets +1/+1 for each artifact and aura you control or something like that. I do believe it how it's worded. So I mean, just having that is another out to that, to be like, okay, I'm just suit up this guy who's going to get really big because of everything else and be able to come through.
Yeah, and it's enchantment, not even aura. So it's artifact or enchantment. So even the things that aren't auras here are gonna work with it. There's not a ton of them, but there's a couple of them. And yeah, it's also a body. Like when it first comes down, you can treat it as a creature for the most part, and you can also, if it dies or someone board wipes, it's still there, available as an equipment then to equip.
Yeah, agreed.
And it gets out of control very quickly in a deck like this, I think.
I agree with that. Have you thought about putting this in your Sigarda deck, even though you're a true blue, you know, a truest to the game type of thing?
I have no, just because for that reason, same reason I don't have Helm of the Gods in there. I've just decided to run no artifacts in that deck, not even a Soul Ring. But I run it in 2 other decks. I have it in my Vela, the Nightclad deck that's so super heavy on artifacts, and I have it in my Arden and Estior equipment deck.
I was just curious
and
how
it's
it works.
Great in both of them. So, like, I mean, I'm already running it in 2 decks, and it's really good in the 2 I'm running it in. And I probably could put it in my treasure deck, too, and have it do good work there. So, like, it's a really good card. I definitely am running it a few places myself.
And I know it's cheap on the price scale. So, I mean, it wouldn't be an expensive card to add.
Yeah, it's one of those cards that's like sitting at, I want to say, just over $1 right now for a rare for Modern Horizons 2. I would guess all the expensive cards in that set hold it back. But that's one of those cards in like 3 years or 4 years, it's not going to get a reprint probably at any time soon. You're like, when did that turn into a $5 card?
It's going to turn into Batterskull, like a $15 card and just sit there with that.
So yeah, really solid card. I do like that suggestion. Should we go over and take a look at the instants here, Chris? What do we have for instants?
All right, so there are 5 instants in this deck. We have Frantic Search, Generous Gift, Resculpt, Sphinx's Revelation, and Thirst for Meaning. Immediately, I want to point out Resculpt in this deck.
Sure.
Now, I know we were high on this card when we first talked about this. It is a very, very good card if you're playing mono blue. In blue-white, I am not sold on this card at all, due to the simple fact that white has so much better removal spells that are not going to give your opponent, a 4/4 creature.
Yeah, in Dimir or Mono Blue or even Rakdos, I think it's a much better card than it is in Blue-White or even maybe Blue-Green, where you just have access to so much more removal.
Yes.
That said, I would say a lot of the stuff he's attacking with are probably flyers, and your stuff is going to be so buff. It's probably not a big deal, but I think I would be tempted to just run, like you do, I don't know, Council's Judgment, I guess, is a sorcery, but like, or Crush Contraband, or Heliod's Intervention, or like, there's a couple things that you could run here that will also remove artifacts and enchantments and are going to leave the thing back and probably have more upside.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I love the card a lot, but in this deck, I just wasn't feeling it for this deck.
Yeah, the two that feel like they're left over from the Bruna deck here are Frantic Search to me and Thirst for Meaning. Agreed. Frantic Search is 3 mana, draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards, and then untap 3 lands. In the Bruna deck, you don't care about the discard portion. You're going to draw. You're basically it's a free spell. You're drawing 2 cards. You're going to pitch 2 auras that are going to wind up being attached to Bruna when she attacks anyway, and you're going to untap 3 lands. That's amazing in that Bruna deck. Similarly, for Thirst for Meaning, you're going to draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you pitch an artifact, or an enchantment card. You're going to pitch an aura that's going to wind up being attached to Bruna. So again, it's a draw 3 for 3, and functionally, because the thing you're going to discard is going to be attached for nothing. It's amazing.
Yes.
Bruna's in the deck, but she's like one of the creatures in the 99 and not going to be consistently out. And so you're going to, I think, find yourself pitching things you don't want to pitch with these 2 cards. And there just isn't a ton of recursion in here.
Agreed. Yeah, there are many better blue draw spells that, even fit in the 3 mana slot. I mean, you could even play, there's the 3 mana generic one that's been printed like 5 million times. It just lets you draw 2. And I think that over even these 2 is probably better. Well,
and especially because this is a deck we should also note, there's no counter spells in here.
Nope, not a 1.
So it's not playing control, and instant speed draw is really nice in a deck where you're doing some control-y stuff, because you're like, okay, I'm going to leave these 3 mana free, and if someone casts something I don't want to have in play, I'll counterspell it. And if they don't, before the end of the turn, before I start, I will just use the mana on a Frantic Search or something and just do some drawing and not have mana go to waste. There's no counters here. There's only 5 instants. Like, this isn't a situation where you're going to be leaving mana up and want to use it to not have it go to waste. So, like, I think you could just run a couple of the efficient sorcery speed draw spells and never even notice. Winged Words, your commander's a flyer. There's a bunch of flyers here. Winged Words is going to be 2 mana just to draw 2 most of the time. Same thing, you have enough things that can attack pretty frequently. Chart a Course is going to be a 2 mana draw 2. They're just going to be slightly more efficient, and in this deck, you're just probably not going to care about losing out on the instant speed.
Oh, I agree with that too.
So they'll be more efficient to cast. You won't have the downside of having to pitch things. I feel like in this deck, the way it's built right now, I would be perfectly fine swapping those out for the more efficient sorcery speed versions.
Agreed. I was actually going to bring up counterspells. It wouldn't be a bad idea to put in, a few of the cheaper counterspells, such as like an Arcane Denial or something like that, just as another protection source, worried about getting board wiped or anything like that. And you just hold that kind of spell specifically for stuff that's going to destroy your board.
It gets tricky. The problem with counterspells, or I guess, problem, I use the term loosely, but like you get a situation where you're like, well, I want to run 6 counterspells. That makes it tougher to do the other things you want to do in your deck then once you put a counterspell package in because you just have less slots.
Yeah.
The reason I don't run counterspells in my Vela deck isn't because I don't want them. It's just because the deck's trying to do so many different things. I had to decide on something, and that was the thing I chose to pitch. I was like, I'm just not going to run counters here like you normally would in a Dimir deck because I just don't have room. So I do get why sometimes you have to make that decision to be like, well, I'm just going to have to not have counterspells because I just don't have room in the deck. This just might be that deck. So I do get that.
Okay, I can get behind that.
There are 6 sorceries here if you want to move over to there. There is a Doom Scar, which is a board wipe from the recent Kaldheim set that has Foretell. So if you just hard cast it, it's 1 additional mana over a Day of Judgment. So it's 5 mana to cast it to destroy all creatures. Or you can foretell it, so you can spend 2 and then only have it cost 3 to cast when you actually want to use it as a board wipe.
Very powerful. I love that card.
Yes. There is Idyllic Tutor, basically a way to tutor up a enchantment card and put it in your hand. Was very expensive for a long time. It's much cheaper now since it had that reprint in Theros Beyond Death. Open the Armory, another way to tutor up an aura or equipment card. Plea for Guidance. Search your library for up to 2 enchantment cards and reveal them, put them into your hand. That's 6 mana to get that. 3 Dreams, 5 mana to go get 3 aura cards with different names, which isn't really a problem here in Commander. And Winds of Wrath, destroy all creatures that aren't enchanted and they can't be regenerated.
Yes, that's like an auto-include. You almost need that in this deck.
Yeah, makes total sense here. So we're looking at board wipes here and a couple of tutors to go get enchantments to make the lethal swing.
Yeah.
I do like Doomscar because I like that you can spread that around. I wonder if Vanquish the Horde, though, just wouldn't be easier. That's the board wipe that's 2, and I think it's 6, but it costs 1 less for each creature in play. So it's basically a 2 mana board wipe in Commander 99% of the time.
Okay.
Then you don't have to foretell it, and it's still going to be cheaper most of the time anyway. I don't think it's necessarily that much better, but I think it's probably slightly better if you just want a cheap way to wipe the board and not have it because part of the thing with a 6 mana board wipe like Austere Command, you usually take your whole turn up doing it. The nice thing about Vanquish the Horde, in Doomscar to a little bit of a degree if you foretell it, you can cast it and still have mana to do something yourself that turn. I do think Vanquish the Horde does a slightly better job of that than Doomscar maybe, but I think Doomscar is really, really good too.
Yeah. I mean, I like the cheaper ones because then you have the option of casting Linvala and sacking her to give all your stuff indestructible while you wipe everyone else's board.
Yeah. Yeah, being able to do that is very, very useful here. Any specific cards you want to suggest here?
I was looking at the prices of some of the tutor effects for enchantments and all that, and they have gotten way out of control.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on? So not really too much that I could suggest based in the sorcery aspect. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I think most of the things we're going to look at and talk about here probably will be over in the enchantment or aura area. So I don't have anything that super jumps out at me for sorceries. I like Council's Judgment a lot, generally speaking. It's pretty cheap in price these days, too. It's like $5-ish. Sorcery speed, but you're almost always going to kill 2 things, and it's almost always interesting, too. I mean, yeah. Max still routinely messes it up, and we're the first person to admit that. So you do get fun things with it. It's an exile effect. It gets around hexproof. There's not a ton of removal here, so I would be tempted to maybe find a spot for Council's Judgment.
Okay.
But it's also kind of a pet card of mine I tend to put in most white decks. So that's one that I kind of was thinking about. But for the most part, I think this mostly makes sense for what you'd expect in a deck that cares a lot more about auras and enchantments than it does about instants and sorceries.
Yep, there are 2 cards that could be considered for this, and it depends on if you want to start adding a recursion package. And that is Open the Vaults and Resurgent Belief.
Yeah.
Both are sorceries. Both are cheap upon your, your monetary scale. They're both not as efficient as what that 4 mana one is that's on the reserve list. It's like $300.
Replenish?
Yes. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's expensive. But, well, that's a different topic for another day. But these 2 do similar things, but they just, they cost more to do it. I mean, or they have a different, like Resurgence is a suspend card. So, I mean, overall, you're still getting the value of what they're supposed to do, so it could help. It's something to look into in the future.
It probably depends on your meta, too. Triumphant Reckoning does look like it costs a gazillion mana because it is 6 and 3, so it is 9 to cast. Return all artifact, enchantment, and planeswalker cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's a lot, and obviously if you have an option to run Replenish because you happen to have one, then run Replenish.
Yeah.
But there are some options that aren't terrible, like the ones you mentioned, Chris. And Triumphant Reckoning, for what it does, if you really do find yourself oftentimes having to find ways to rebuild, I mean, at the point in the game when you can spend 9 mana on it and feel something out that you can attach your stuff to, there's a good chance that kills somebody.
Yeah, and that's...
So I think that's a 9 mana that sucks, but like it's still a really good card, I think.
Yeah, if you're in the game that long, and graveyards haven't been destroyed, and you're in that type of game, if you drop that at the key moment, it could just seal you the game right then and there.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about how enchantments are going to be a big part here, but let's maybe save those for last. Take a look at the creatures that are here. What are there for creatures in this deck?
There are 21 creatures. We have a Johnny's Chosen, Archon of Sun's Grace, Armored Sky Hunter, Bruna, Light of Alabaster, which is the card that we were discussing that this deck was first originally started as, Cloud Blazer, Danitha, Compassion Paragon, Eidolon of Countless Battles, Esper Sentinel, Grace Blade Artisan, Hannah Ship's Navigator, Heliod's Pilgrim, Invisible Stalker, Keeper of the Accord, Knight of the White Orchid, Horse Spirit Dancer, Mongara the Diplomat, Mesa Enchantress, Nomad Mythmaker, Saram Senior Edificer, Sun Titan, and Umbra Mystic. All of these are really good for this deck. Like, I read each one of these when I was going through this, and I'm like, do I want to cut this one? I'm like, but this does this, and this seems really good. And
I kept thinking of so many opportunities where I was like, maybe that isn't perfect, but there's so many times it would be really, really useful to have out.
Yes.
Like, even Grace Blade Artisan isn't a very exciting card, but then you're like, but if you happen to get 3 or 4 auras on it, you'd probably just kill somebody with it.
Yeah, and I looked at this deck as the idea of going wide, where you just like, I just want to slap like 1 or 2 auras on one creature and, get the value off of that. And you look at what each creature does, and it's like, okay, any aura attached to this is really good. Yeah,
like Johnny's Chosen and Archon of Sun's Grace, both are things that enchantments coming into play are giving you bodies that are available to continue to go wide with.
Yes. God, I couldn't even really like figure out one that was horrible. Like, maybe the worst one overall, maybe Invisible Stalker if I had to choose anything. Just to the simple fact that it's a 1/1 for 2 that, while yes, it is unblockable and hexproof, it doesn't really do anything other than that.
Yeah, it's probably a pretty good target for a lot of stuff. I thought that maybe Nomad Mythmaker I didn't love too. I think it's better in theory than it is in practice. A lot of these auras are relatively cheap anyway, and you're going to spend mana and tap a creature to save a couple mana, and it doesn't work for a full turn. I don't know if I love Nomad Mythmaker either.
Okay. Yeah, I could get behind that too. Yeah, like I was going through and I'm like, okay, Sun Titan maybe, because, it is just a body that just does random broken things if you want it to, but it doesn't quite fit the theme, but hey, it's recursion, and that's what we need right in this thing. A
couple creatures I kind of thought might work well here. I'm not sure what you would swap them out for, but I think Heavenly Blade Master is really good. It's an angel. It's 5 and a white, so it is 6 to cast for a 3/6, but it has flying and, most importantly, double strike. And when it enters the battlefield, you may attach any number of auras and equipment you control to it, and other creatures you control get +1/+1 for each aura and equipment attached to Heavenly Blade Master. So it's going to turn itself into just a wrecking ball when it comes into play. even if you put like 2 or 3 auras on it, it's with double strike, that's going to kill somebody. And then it's buffing the rest of your guys up at the same time.
Yep.
I think it's a really solid card. I think it would do a lot of work in this deck.
That's for sure.
So all told, I think that's a pretty solid creature suite. And there's a couple of things we would change, but like I get why these are being all used here. So let's go over, last but not least, trying to look at the enchantments that are in this deck. There's 20 different enchantments. Starting at the top, we'll look at all that glitters. It's 1 and a white. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. Aqueous Form, single blue, enchanted creature can't be blocked, and whenever it attacks, scry 1. Battle Mastery, enchanted creature has double strike. Cather's Call, enchanted creature has vigilance, and at the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 white human creature token. Celestial Mantle, creature gets +3/+3, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, double its controller's life total. Curiosity, whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card for a single blue. Drake Umbra, 4 and a blue, creature gets +3/+3 and flying, and has totem armor, which is pretty decent protection against board wipes. Enchanted Evening, all permanents are enchantments in addition to their other types. There's an ethereal armor here. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control and has first strike. Felidar Umbra, enchanted creature has a lifelink, and it also has an ability where you can spend 1 and a white to move it around, and it has totem armor. Gift of Immortality, whenever enchanted creature dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, and then return Gift of Immortality to the battlefield attached to that creature at the beginning of the next end step. That's some really good tech with Linvala, because you can sacrifice her to give your stuff hexproof for indestructible. She'll come back, and then Gift will come back in on her, so you can do the whole thing again next turn if you need to.
Very gross.
Yeah. A Hyena Umbra, totem armor again, and a creature gets +1/+1 on first strike. Monetary Siege, you can choose a Cons or Dragons mode. It's 2 and a blue, and whichever mode you choose is what it does. So if you choose Cons, at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card, then discard a card. Was probably very good in a Bruna deck, so you can throw that aura that you're going to get to attach for free. The Dragons mode, spells your opponent's cast that target you or a permanent you control costs 2 more. Monologue Tax, whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure. Rhystic Study is just a gross card in general. There's a smothering tithe here, similarly. A Sphere of Safety, creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments you control. So basically, if this is in play, people probably just can't attack you. Staggering Insight, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has a lifelink, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Steel of the Godhead, as long as enchanted creature is white, it gets +1/+1 and has a lifelink, and if it's blue, it gets +1/+1 and is unblockable. And in the case of this deck, if you're putting this on Bruna or Linvala or something, it's going to get both of those things. And last but not least, Vanishing. It's a single blue, and you can spend 2, and enchanted creature phases out. So it was also a good way to protect whatever your enchanted thing is by phasing it out if someone tries to remove it.
Yep.
Okay, bunch of things there. So what do you think of the enchantment/aura suite, Chris? Anything you would like to add or don't particularly like here?
I think it's just kind of lacking overall. Like, I mean, there's a few auras out there in the wild that give just, straight up bonuses, and which is what I think we need to focus on. I know there was one that's like 4 mana, gives it +3/+3 flying, turns it into an angel, or +4/+4 and flying and turns it into an angel or something like that. Those are the types of enchantments or auras that I would like to see put in here if you want to do a go wide. So then it's not so basic on, like I need my creature to have evasion, or I need my creature to do this or this. It's just like, I'm just going to suit up this one creature who's getting bigger, and I can hit you for 5 with this one and hit this player for 5 with this one, and don't have to worry so much about targeting all onto one creature to get so many useful effects. So the biggest one that I was surprised I didn't see in here, and I don't know if a lot of people really play it, is Sage's Reverie. It is a 4 mana aura that gives you +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, but then you get to draw a card for each enchantment you control, or each aura or something like that. But it's just card draw plus the bonus of, adding power and toughness, which is amazing. And I actually looked through quite a few lists, and I haven't really seen this in a lot of lists, so I don't know what's going on with that.
Yeah, that would be really good in this deck, I think.
I think it would be wonderful. I mean, that card draw is really what's lacking, and why not get both of them in one little go? Yeah, agreed. This is a perfect deck for it. I think it should be in here. I think if there was just one aura I would add to this deck, Mantle of the Ancients. Yes. That card is so good.
2 white. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each aura and equipment attached to it. So that's useful. In general, if you've got a handful of auras out, it's going to buff this creature. But the most important part of this card, when Mantle of the Ancients enters the battlefield, return any number of target auras and or equipment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to enchanted creature. So it's a replenish effect on an aura. But like, even if you're not replenishing, even if there's nothing in your graveyard, that still does plenty of work coming into play, buffing your creature for each aura attached to it, or equipment if you have a Batterskull or something along those lines in here.
Yeah, that's
Holy
amazing.
Avenger, for example, or Helm of the Gods, whatever. If I added just one thing, it would absolutely be it would be Mantle of the Ancients.
Yep. My biggest question, and maybe you know the answer to this, and maybe the listeners do too, because I'll probably get yelled at for this later. Why don't you know this stuff? You should know this. Now, when you vanish a creature with auras on it, don't they just all fall off it and go in the graveyard?
They do not anymore.
Not anymore. Okay.
They changed the way phasing works a couple years back. So things that are phased out, and actually I could even be wrong. I know they changed it so it doesn't affect tokens. Tokens used to just stay phased out. They changed that. But yes, the original, I believe it's the original wording on phasing, so this wasn't even a change. Things that are enchanted come back into play with the auras still on them.
Okay, that's what I was curious about, because otherwise I see no point in playing Vanishing, because you're just going to lose all the, exponential upside that you had of suiting up something.
Yeah, it's a way to phase your thing out, to save it, and you see it a lot of times in Bruna decks. It's a good way to save Bruna because the stuff stays attached to her. So
okay, I was just curious about that, because even if it didn't, Bruna can still attack and just bring them all back anyways. So
right, yeah. So that one's still pretty decent in this deck.
Yep. I do like the Curiosity package and stuff like that, but if I were to run a serious package with Curiosity or Aqueous Form, stuff like that, I would be playing creatures that already have evasion built into them, or in the term of Aqueous Form, a creature that's going to get me something when it hits. So that's what I would focus on if that's the package that I want to run. Otherwise I'd run other stuff that just gives me better overall bonuses than that.
Yeah, I think so. For example, Face of Divinity is 2 and a white. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2. And as long as another aura is attached to enchanted creature, it has first strike and lifelink. There's almost always going to be an aura on here, so basically it winds up being a 3 mana +2/+2 first strike and lifelink, which is really, really useful. I'd be tempted to find a slot for that. I think that's a little bit better than maybe Monologue Tax. That's not that good of a card in general. This is going to play more into your strategy, I think. So that's the kind of card I think would be really, really good here that isn't currently in this deck. Things of that nature, I think. I do like quite a few of these. I do like all the glitters. Battle Mastery is always really solid. I do think the Umbras are a really good include here. So I like to see all those things show up. If I was trying to find room for a few of the cards we mentioned, like Mantle of the Ancients, I don't necessarily love Cathar's Call. It gives vigilance, and at your end step you make a 1/1 token, and I guess this deck is going wide, but I can't imagine you're putting things on those tokens that often, or they're that useful. I think that card is not that great in this deck.
I can think of a card that would be just strictly better than that creates tokens as well, and that's just, Sigil of the Empty Throne.
Yeah, right, exactly.
A 5-mana enchantment that whenever you cast an enchantment, so your enchantment doesn't even have to resolve, you just
to make you 4/4 angel.
Yeah,
fantastic card.
Yeah, because then that fits the go wide theme. Plus, then you have 4/4 flyers that already have evasion built in, so you can put something on them, even if it's a Curiosity, for instance, and hit for 4 and draw a card.
Yeah, that's really, really good here. I also don't necessarily love Monastery Siege here. I feel like 2 is pretty easy threshold to get over for your opponents to target their stuff. And it's only spells that doesn't even ward. If it was ward, maybe, so it would slow up abilities too, but it's just spells. I think 2 is pretty easy to match. And when you were playing Bruna, the cons mode is great because you draw a card and you're just going to pitch the aura you're going to reattach anyway. I think that's less good in this deck that isn't a Bruna deck. If you just care about the card draw primarily, which I'm guessing that was the case, I know it's $9 now, but Mystic Remora is just a great card, and it's going to draw you stuff too as a non-aura enchantment, something along those lines. I know it's obvious, and everyone suggests it if you're playing blue, but I would just run that over Monastery Siege.
If you can find them, that's the thing.
You can find it, yeah, exactly.
Because I don't know of any of them that are floating out in the wild right now in any of our local game stores.
Yeah, no, it's legitimately a tough card to find now. It's gotten so in demand the last few years, for sure.
Yep. I foresee it coming back. It is coming.
It has to get reprinted eventually, you would think.
Baldur's Gate. Come on. Give us a Mystic Remora and Baldur's Gate. Foil version. That's what I'm looking for.
One enchantment I have put in my Enchantress deck but have not had a chance to draw or use yet is Hallowed Haunting. It's 2 white. As long as you control 7 or more enchantments, is which deck will pretty often do. Creatures you control have flying and vigilance. But even if you don't, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a white spirit cleric creature token with this creature's power and toughness equal to the number of spirits you control. There's not a ton of spirits like naturally in this deck. I'm not even sure there are any, I guess I didn't even count. But like if you make, whenever you cast an enchantment, you're going to make one of those spirits, and eventually you're going to have like 3 or 4 or 5 of them in play. It's just like worst case, it's just making you, like the humans we mentioned with Cthar's Call, it's just making you spirits that are going to scale better than those humans. And eventually you're going to get to the point where it's giving your stuff flying and vigilance too. I haven't had a chance to use it. Like I said, I've got it on deck, but I think this could be a good place for Hallowed Haunting also.
Okay, I could see that.
Those were the main aura changes I had suggestions for. Did you have any other ones there, Chris?
Not really, that are going to change, make the deck play immediately better. There's cards like Invocation of Saint Traft or Geist of Saint Traft that allows you to get extra creatures out. While, yes, you have to sacrifice them at the end of turn or end of combat or whatever it is, it still allows you to fit that go wide theme where you can just get more and more creatures out to hit overall. Stuff like that I wouldn't mind running. Any of your cards that kind of recur themselves, like the Fool's Demise or what was the other one? The Gift of Immortality. I mean, stuff like that could be something to decide on. Anything that gives you double value is what I would be looking for at the time.
I kind of agree with that. That's going to make it easier to just be able to turn the swings you have into really value swings that are going to be things someone has to deal with, or they're going to maybe get hit for lethal.
Yes.
So I'm on board with that for sure. I think that's it for me. I there's a lot of potential in this deck, but you can, like I said, like we talked about before, it still very much feels like it's stuck halfway between being the Linvala deck it wants to be and being the Bruna deck it once was.
I agree with that 100%.
Okay, that is going to wrap up episode 296 of Commander Central. Thank you, Hunter Arlo, for sharing your Linvala Go Wide Auras deck with us. That was actually cool to look at something someone was running in Azorius for Auras that wasn't the traditional thing we usually see. This year, I wound up building an Azorius equipment deck, and I just, it's always fun to do something in colors where people don't usually do that thing. They don't usually do Auras in Azorius. They don't usually do equipment in Azorius. It's always fun to look at it and do that kind of thing. So we appreciate you sharing that with us. If you want to find me on the Twitter birds, I am at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max, and you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find them at Ursa Bearwalker, and our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week with another show. Until then, I'm Dana.
And I'm Chris.